All right. Welcome to Chapter 70 of the Melbourne Strength Culture Presents Quantum Lifting podcast, where today we have a special guest from Sydney, Will Berkman, who is also the host of Weekly Weights podcast, which you've probably listened. If you're in the strength/fitness community, you probably have seen and heard their content. Really, really good content. But Will, could you just give us a little introduction on yourself before we get started?
Thank you. I always call myself the co-host just because obviously I do host it with my mate Alex Hayes, and he always gets, I reckon, salty if I say I'm the host because he's there too. But I'm a co-host of
co-captain.
Yeah, shout out Alex. That's all I'm going to mention of him for the rest of the podcast. We can brush him. So my name's Will. I'm a powerlifting coach and personal trainer from Sydney. I'm also a dietitian by qualification, so I have degrees in exercise and sports science and a master's of nutrition and dietetics. I've been personal training since 2015, but I was actually coaching lifters prior to that. So I had a little online stable through 2014 and was coaching some people at powerlifting comps then too. But yeah, more recently, obviously, it's become my full-time gig. So, I do host Weekly Weights. I write some articles that are on my website, willberkman.com. And I'm otherwise quite a big fan of you guys at Melbourne Strength Culture. So I'm really thrilled to be on. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're a big fan of yours too. I've actually signed up to your mailing list. So
yeah, I noticed that.
I get your emails. Yeah, I just like to stay in check with everyone. I've signed up to yours, Luke Tulloch's. I've got a few now. And it kind of just keeps the emails interesting. You flick through your emails and you see, you get little articles and programs, and it just keeps the ideas and thoughts flowing. And I like to keep my fingertips in everyone and what they're doing.
Yeah, I actually, you guys, the Strength Culture one where you were doing the weekly goodies, where I really like that format. So if you're not on the Strength Culture mailing list, get on it. It's good fun. But the coaches all send like just one little weekly snippet. And I like that you guys cover, and I know like as Strength Culture, your brand is about being like exercise and everything related to it and just life in general. You guys cover such a wide array of stuff. Like I think, might have even been Stupus, or maybe it was Jamie. Somebody put up a song by Roy Scott, Eeple, and they were like, "I've been listening to this and it bangs when I'm doing my cardio." And I had heard that song like 5 years ago and it completely slipped my mind. And just having it brought to mind again was really cool. But I like that little snippet. It actually makes it a fun email to read.
I'll answer who put that up because you said someone doing their cardio. Now, Jamie Smith hasn't done cardio or any form of training for over a year. So it was Jamie B. I remember he put that up. He said that he was doing it while he was training. And we were just, and I was putting up like if I watched a good Netflix series or listened to a good podcast. I think for me personally, I always like to have like content to just go to. Like I've got, friends will send me podcasts and whatnot to listen to. And so I think that was the goal during lockdown, just to sort of give people in our emailing list just something to potentially go and watch on the weekend or listen to when they went for a walk and just ideas like that. Cause it's a book to read. And it was. And
I know you put this in the notes of things you'd like to talk about is like the importance of having some interests outside the gym. And like when we talk about like coaching services and things today as well, that's kind of something I find really important is like being able to relate to people on a level outside of just like we go to the gym and we squat up and eat eights. Like realizing that there's a person under there who has other interests and is motivated by other things, and like that there are emotions you can experience outside of the gym in different ways is really cool. And so when somebody sends me a song where I'm like, that speaks to something in me, or they say, hey, this is a cool show. Like, even if I don't really get into the show, it still gives me an insight into their character. And so I think like having content like that makes you relatable. And it's the same with like how on my Instagram, I'm always posting like stupid jokes and bad stories and stuff that are just like, they're lame, but they're an insight into who I am. And it seems to be something that people actually appreciate, and just being approachable like that is cool,
I heard you say on a podcast with Bryce Lewis that you were asking a couple of your clients, so why'd you end up signing up with me? Because there is, there's so many coaches out there, but why'd you pick me? And they're like, oh, I liked your dog. And like, it's such an innocuous thing, but people see those personality traits, your dog, you play guitar, you do this, like JP plays chess, and they kind of like that abstract, they do something different away from just lifting weights. And that's what they're ultimately probably inclined to then join up with you, because at the end of the day, they probably can get a very similar service from many coaches, but it's those little personality traits that are going to draw you in.
Yeah, and
that's, yeah.
especially, oh, sorry, you keep going.
No, I was going to say that was something that I heavily started to like learning guitar, putting it on my Instagram, because people were fascinated by that, because it was away from just throwing a squat and a deadlift, that squat, deadlift, bench, which is something I know you play guitar as well.
Yeah, and you got to remember, like, if somebody's inquiring with me for coaching, like I have a few clients, you know, JP being one, who are outright better lifters than me, but the majority are people who are like wanting to get into the sport. And I think realizing that like you don't have to be just a robot who's like gym obsessed to still be passionate about the gym is important too. And when they're like, oh, here's Will, he's a normal guy, like he makes silly mistakes and does things that are funny, like he takes the piss out of himself, or you know, he plays guitar, he reads books, like he does things that make him like me, makes them suddenly go, actually, you know what? I'm like this person enough to try and do things like this person in the gym too. I think it's much more important than just a sales pitch. It's very much like actually an aspect of getting buy-in. I really think so.
Yeah, 100%. I think there is a bit of a stigma with gym and that people who consistently train for years on end are robotic. And I know I'll get the passing comment from people like, oh, you must eat really healthy. And I'm like, you know what? Like, no, we don't. Like, we might be in the gym, we might be training, and we might be pretty consistent with it. We've done it for years on end, but we still smash fast food. We still go out. We still drink. Like, it's not. So I think it is important to show that sort of that balance with people in the industry. That you can train 4 or 5 days a week in the gym and still have a life outside of the gym, doing other stuff, other activities.
And I think the flip side's important too. So the person who's probably the best exemplar of this that I can think of is Matt Bartholomew, who's like 94 kilo powerlifter in Australia, incredibly good lifter and unbelievably diligent in his training. And he documents it, and he's plainly passionate, he's analytical. And people resonate with that as well, because they say like, wow, there's like authentic desire to be better from this person. And so certain clientele will go towards him as well. But I think if you are way too far at either pole, like if all I ever did was present myself as really casual and I didn't show anything informative or show any passion for training, people wouldn't want to train with me, because they'd be like, well, this guy doesn't care about exercise, like obviously. And if I was unrelatably self-obsessed with my training, people wouldn't want to train with me either. But if you're somewhere in that middle ground, like Matt, incredibly diligent and obviously really into his client's success as well, clients who are like, I'm passionate about the gym and I care about my success, and this person embodies that, will go towards him. And people who are like, I want to have fun in the gym, I want to embrace my life, I want to get better and like have a holistic experience, might drift slightly towards like maybe somebody like you and I, who shows a lot more of the outside of our life. But either way, how you present yourself really matters to your clients, because it's their impression of you. It's the first one they get before they start engaging with you as a coach.
Yeah, and going to be the tipping point as to why they end up potentially choosing you. But Matt Bartholomew is someone that's very interesting, because he is very, very well known for the 1%ers and being very diligent, but he also understands that not everyone is like that, which I like. It's something that he pushes, it's his philosophy and whatnot, but personally for me, being like that 1% I'd probably end up stopping lifting. Like I wouldn't enjoy it. And so then you have to sort of weigh up what's beneficial. And I think that's with like clients as well, figuring out what's beneficial for them in adhering to a training program, because not everyone is going to be the exact same.
No. And I think again, the reason why Matt's such a good exemplar is like, if somebody comes to him in that peak of motivation, wanting to do the 1%ers, he as a person, he lives that, right? He breathes it. And so if somebody's like, I want to maximize my returns, you know, they're going to want to go to somebody like Matt, because they know that he's been there. Whereas if I were to say convey not a sufficient degree of seriousness in my training, then many very serious athletes might be like, oh, I don't want to be operating at a level that this guy doesn't. So there is something to both ends, but I think what you said about like being able to recognize the client's degree of commitment and being able to meet them in the middle is really, really important too. And if somebody does say, hey, like, I want to powerlift and it's something I enjoy, but it's number 5 in my list of priorities behind, you know, X, Y, and Z other things and 2 other sporting hobbies too, then as a coach, of course, you've got to respect that and use your knowledge to try and sort of like give them the best service and best results you can, whilst recognizing like that your training is a part of their life that's designed to build it up, not a part that's designed to detract from the other things that they like too.
Yeah, 100%. I used to get caught up in that a little bit where I would see it. We'd get, say, a lifter that we're like, this lifter could be really, really good. They have the potential to be like placing at nationals. But I started to realize, and so did Jamie, that maybe that was what we wanted for them and not what they actually wanted out of training and joining with us. So that, and I guess that's just learning across the years of doing this, that, yeah, not everyone actually wants what you want as a coach. And you sort of have to, at the end of the day, figure out what they want because it's their experience. And we talk about training at Strength Culture as an experience. Ultimately, it's an experience and something that people enjoy. They want to come here to enjoy the social side of things and lift a few weights and stuff. And so you have to really sort of nitpick what they want because it's their experience, not yours as the coach. And yeah, we figured that out along the way, but it all comes.
Before we started recording, you were like, hey man, if you've got any stories or anything, you can just
tell me.
So
before you get started, I'm just going to say we are about to jump on our topic, which was going to be overcoaching, just before people.
Yeah, it's not just going to be story time. But
we are going to talk about overcoaching, but we'll start with his story and then we'll get into overcoaching.
I did weightlifting when I was like 18, and I only did it for like about 8 months because I ended up having knee surgery that made squatting deep really hard. But I was doing weightlifting and because I'd started quite young, but I've been lifting for quite a while, I was already really strong. Like at the time I was deadlifting 230 and I could squat like 180 high bar beltless and stuff. So I start weightlifting and I was doing like broomstick drills for an hour and then just doing some like squats and pulls and stuff. And my coach was this guy called Marty. Just a nice dude, pretty quirky. And he kind of recognized that like I had a degree of talent because I was already strong. And like I moved well, I had an athletic background. But the thing that drew me to weightlifting was like curiosity about the sport itself and like the enjoyment you get. Like weightlifting is very exhilarating. If you like catch a snatch perfectly, you feel like so balanced and amazing and cool. And it's very different from like doing a deadlift where it's a very slow, grindy thing. So I was doing that and I was training with a few of my friends who were all working at the gym that I worked at. And anyway, this coach was like, oh man, like you got some talent. I'm going to send you to the Olympic Training Center in Sydney because the guy who coaches there, his name was Luke. The guy who coaches there is the coach of our junior national squad and you could really make it. And so I was like, oh, great. So he sends me to see this guy's name. His name was Luke. And at the time I didn't have a pair of weightlifting shoes. So I'd been borrowing shoes from Triumph and this guy was the importer of the Adidas Adistars. So that was the shoe that I think they ended up using in the London Olympics. And I've got a pair of them here now that he gave me, which was sick. But I turn up and I'm training with him and I'm doing some warm-ups and things. And he goes, oh, like I hear you're still playing rugby, which I was. I was training for rugby like 3 or 4 times a week. And I was like, yeah, I am. And he was like, why do you weightlift? And I was like, oh, because it's fun, I guess. Like I like hanging out with my mates. I'm learning. It's cool. Like it's more enjoyable than bodybuilding to me. And he was sort of like, oh, okay. And he warmed me up to 50 kilos on snatches. And he made me snatch. And when I got to the bottom position, he said, wait there. And so I'm sitting there in an overhead squat with 50 kilos over my head. And this guy starts walking around me in a circle, right? And he goes like, you're not allowed to stand up. So I'm bottom of this overhead squat. And he starts telling me like, if you can't commit to one thing in your life, you'll never be great. And you've got to decide here and now, do you want to be a weightlifter because you can be great? Or do you want to be a rugby player when you know you're never going to make it there? You know, like why are you messing around trying to have fun with your friends when you could be at the Olympics one day and blah, 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 blah. And I shit you not, over a minute, right? I'm sitting in the bottom of this squat. So my legs are aching, right? And like, I'm a highly competitive person. And at the time I was also like, this guy's a fucking dick. So I really don't want to be the dude who puts the bar down until he tells me to, because then I'll feel like he's won. But he went full psychological warfare and he'd be standing behind me basically saying like, you're a failure. You'll never amount to anything, blah, 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 blah. You got to pick weightlifting. Like, you know, if you were serious, you'd quit footy and you'd come train with me 4 days a week. I've spoken to Marty about it and yeah, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, after a minute, 90 seconds, he relents. I put the bar down and that was basically the end of my session with him. And so I went home and I remember talking to my parents. They were like, how was it? And I was like, it was fucking terrible. Like this guy had, you know, he obviously knew weightlifting. He was a really good coach, but his whole approach was basically to try and like make me do what he wanted me to do. And I was like, I'm sufficiently motivated already. I'm like going to the gym for a few hours, multiple days a week. I'm doing my drills at home. Like, I'm having a great time. I don't need to be made to do any more than that. But this guy was like, if I can't conform to his way of doing things, then there's no point. And that was such like a formative experience for me, because once I started coaching people, I looked back at that and I was like, fuck, I would hate to be that guy who gets somebody who's having a good time and like ruins it just by trying to make him, you know, my little model of what I want to see.
Yeah, it's a very like, it's a very like oppressive, like, it sounds like, you know, I think of like the Russian or Chinese, like Olympic teams, like if you have good genetics, you have to do this and have to perform and have to win gold for you. And it comes back to like, I think you said, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it in anything if you can't commit. But it's like, well, what if that's not what's meant for you? You want to play a bit of rugby. You like that social aspect of a team sport, but then you also just want to do a bit of weightlifting and learn about Olympic weightlifting. And so I guess it's very clear that it was what he wanted was for you to, you know, be committed to weightlifting and then go to the Olympics, Commonwealth Games and whatever, but that's not what you wanted. And I think that's a very big thing, especially that I faced early on with my coaching. It was that, why don't these guys want to do powerlifting comps? Like, I love doing powerlifting. It's like, well, not everyone wants to do that. Some people just want to do one and then maybe not do one for 2 years, and they want to do a bit of bodybuilding and a bit of this, and they want to have a bit of, and I've really changed my coaching philosophies to sort of put the client first. It's their experience. And that, I think that story there sort of sums that up, which is 100%. Exactly what we were talking about. But yeah, I guess it's that whole thing of what's making it. And I do agree with the book Atomic Habits. He talks about the biggest difference between a professional and an amateur is a professional's ability to tolerate boredom, because it's no doubt if you want to become excellent at a certain task or skill, weightlifting, guitar, it's probably going to get a little bit mundane, monotonous and boring in the middle there to actually really be the best at it. But it's like, I think a professional wants to tolerate that. An amateur who just wants to do it for a bit of fun doesn't need to do that. And I think that's, as coaches, you got to sort of distinguish that very early on so that you can get the best experience for your client or athlete.
Well, the word they use
didn't do, which your coach clearly didn't do.
No, not at all. The word they use for it in video games is grinding. Like, if there's a certain skill or something that you want to be able to do that you can't, that requires a high degree of technical proficiency, the act of going like outside of the game or like actual play that you enjoy and trying to get better at it and just spending however long it takes doing something fucking boring. Sorry for swearing.
That's right.
Doing whatever it takes to get better at something, even though it's not enjoyable in the short term, is grinding, you know, like it's something that you do with an eye on an end result. And if you don't care about that end result enough, and of course you're not going to grind at things because it's not fun. You're there for the short-term reward, right?
100%. And I saw that with my guitar. And I think it's been about 10 months now I've been playing. And early on, the first 3 months was like hell boring. You're not playing any songs. And especially being 27 and trying to learn, or 26 back then, you're sitting there just trying to change chords. You're making shit sounds. It's just crap. But slowly, as I've seen the progression and getting better at it, it becomes a bit more motivating itself. But I have noticed that to get good at something, I'll have to spend half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just doing the same monotonous little transition or chord change, and just to get a little sound in one part of a song better. And it's made me appreciate like the great guitarists or anyone that's great in any endeavor, of how much they've had to like grind, as you said, to just get good at one little thing, because it is a rabbit hole, especially guitar. Guitar's a bloody rabbit hole.
Guitar's hard. But the thing, like, and this is something you can absolutely extend to training as well. Like, one of the secrets of getting through that phase of like things being hard is finding ways to give yourself like small reward and gamifying it. So like when I was first learning guitar, you know, if I only knew 2 chords, I'd try and figure out as many ways as I could to play them, or like what melody can I create within like these really, really simple constraints. So it forced me to keep sort of grinding at something, but I gave myself small reward and like explored some creativity and avoided boredom. And in the same way, like in video games, maybe you can grind a skill, but you can do it in like a game-like scenario once you've got like the fundamentals down. And in training, like if you're doing work that might be a bit boring or light or a bit technically oriented or something, you can still find ways to give yourself small reward. You can track like rep PBs or PBs to that exercise, or you can almost have like reward exercises or reward sessions or reward sets even after you do the grindy stuff, just so you always give yourself a good feeling. But you got to give yourself a reason to come back, or else you're tolerating boredom more than you have to.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely have found that with guitar specifically, is that element of just playing stuff that's a bit rewarding. So at the moment I'm learning like a 12-bar blues, and it's new and it sounds cool. It's got that real funky blues sound. I'm enjoying that. And it's kind of made me like, I'm looking forward to going to practice later. And I think with training, an easy way to make it very rewarding for people is just exercise variation. And as powerlifters, obviously, and being powerlifting coaches, can get monotonous. 3 simple movements. And I know Juggernaut training systems are big on exercise variation, but just throwing in a few different variations can really sort of help people stick to their training. I know it does with myself. And like, people have been asking me why I'm doing Zercher squats at the moment. They're like, you could just do a front squat. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to do front squats. I'm like, I'm actually enjoying Zercher squats. It's novel. It's exciting. It's new. The last 4 years I've been doing the same, very similar stuff and doing something completely different. It's like, that's what I want to do. I don't want to do front squats. I've done them before. They're a bit boring and for me right now. So I think, yeah, definitely with training, it's probably exercise variation would be the big change that is very easy to make while just sort of incorporating it in with your main stuff. We're going to diverge onto the actual topic because I feel like if I don't take control, we'll just keep talking. So let's go on to overcoaching. It was something that we discussed about what we wanted to talk about on this podcast, and that was brought to my attention because I think that is quite a cool topic to sort of delve into. It's something that I see quite prevalent at powerlifting competitions. I see over cueing on the side by coaches, and I feel like they're just saying cues for the sake of saying cues. But also then we can sort of dive into actual programming and face-to-face coaching and where overcoaching may be sort of prevalent and what's happening. But is that something that you've seen at powerlifting comps? Just cues for the sake of cues?
100%. And, I got roasted for this last year. It was really funny. So JP, who we've mentioned, one of my clients at Nationals last year, which he won, I was coaching him and he said to me, he just likes to have somebody talking to him the whole time. He said, walk me through my setup. Like, just talk to me, tell me what to do. Like, but it's nice to have a voice reassuring me the whole time. And I want you to say these 2 things at these 2 times. So if that's what he wants, absolutely, I'm going to do it. So I'm there and he's going to squat and I'm saying, like, squeeze the bar tight, all right, work it onto your back, like pop it out of the rack, little steps, wait for your calls, JP. And then he wanted me to say hamstrings before he starts his descent. So I'm like, hamstrings. Anyway, saying all this stuff, commit to me, like completely irrelevant and extraneous, but like, that's just what he wanted. So I say it. And because JP is a well-known lifter, he had everything filmed. He puts together his YouTube video of his lifts from Nationals. And he had little annotations explaining why he took certain attempts and things so that he could win the comp. And so there are people in the comments as well, which was really funny, asking like, why is his coach saying hamstrings? And then all these like internet wizards saying like, oh, if you tense your hamstrings, you can use them as a slingshot in your squat and all this bullshit. It's got nothing to do with it. It's just because that's what he wanted me to say. But then this coach from New Zealand, who I'm going to name and shame, his name's Jason Clark, really good guy, very good coach as well. He put out this Instagram story because he'd obviously watched it, saying exactly that, like coaches just saying too much shit at comps aren't helping their lifters and they're wasting their time, which I agree with, and I'll get into why. And a couple of people sent it to me because it was like, they were like, oh, shots fired, like he's having a dig at me. So I actually messaged him privately and we had this really good discussion. And that's why I say he's a really good dude. Because we had this back and forth where I was like, oh, it's like, that's what JP wanted me to do. And he was like, oh, in that case, I'd have done the same. And then we spoke about the role of cueing. And I told him I was writing an article at the time that actually dealt with a lot of the things he was saying because I completely agree. And I've published that article. It's really good, but no one's ever read it on my site. It's called the Coaches Toolbox. And we speak about queuing and stuff there, but he was a really great guy. And anyway, so I got roasted for it rightly because context free, if I'd seen somebody doing what I was doing, I'd have thought that was dumb. But on the platform, they're like pretty much what you're saying should just be encouragement, because when we cue lifters, we're directing their attention to something, and attention itself is like a constraint on movement. I could probably backtrack and talk some basic stuff about like motor learning and motor control theory, but like when you direct people's attention, which is a limited resource, you are constraining the ways in which they can go about a motor task. That's number one. And number two is that our best performances in things almost always come about through automaticity, so automatically. And the reason for that is, if you think, probably the easiest way to think about it is like a posture task. So say I got you to stand on, have you ever been on one of those balance boards that's meant to like simulate surfing, where you stand on it and it's got a rocker in the middle and you wobble? So when you are standing on that and you're trying to keep yourself level and not fall over, right? You know, or if you're standing on a Bosu ball, even like a large part of the things that are keeping you upright are like reflexive and things that are happening subcortically. So you're not actually consciously controlling, like, I'm going to dorsiflex my ankle quickly because if I don't, I'm going to tip, right? That's all happening below the level of your awareness. And if you start thinking too much about like dorsiflex my ankle, that nerve signal has to go all the way up further, you know, and if you layer in like, I need to inhibit one muscle so that another one can fire and stuff, you get like asynchronous and just clunky movement. And that expands all the way through to squatting and stuff as well. Or, you know, even if I said to you, go like throw a ball, but instead of just throwing the ball, I want you to think of like when you cock your arm back, and then I want you to think of extending at the shoulder and extending at the elbow in sequence and all this stuff. It slows you down and it makes you inefficient. And it's been demonstrated in research across all sorts of motor domains. So if we get somebody who's going to squat and they're trying to squat the heaviest weight that they possibly can, they've done enough squats, they've got something of a motor pattern there that's established already. And presuming that they've done some training, when they deviate from that pattern, they're like, they have systems in place that don't require conscious control for them to try and correct it already, right? So telling them to think about it doesn't actually help, it just slows them down. But you can control their arousal. So if you have somebody who's hyper aroused and they need to be brought down a little bit, you can calm them down. You can sort of tell them it's going to be okay, or like say, take your time and speak in that sort of like low, steady tone. Or if you have somebody who needs to be really hyped up to give their best performances, you can do that too. So once they're on the platform, really all you should be doing is controlling arousal. And that may mean talking about things that are relevant and directing their attention, which is often helpful. So it might be slow down, wait for your calls, or it might be, you know, get tight, chest up. But it shouldn't be anything unfamiliar or attention directing. And you certainly shouldn't be introducing like a novel cue where suddenly they're fucking thinking, if you say like hips back and you've never said that before, they're suddenly thinking, oh, what are my hips meant to be doing? And they got their max on their back. You're just slowing them down. So I do absolutely think that like overcoaching is prevalent, and it's done by coaches who are concerned that they're not like doing enough to facilitate their athletes' performance. Whereas in reality, once they're on the platform, like, you've pretty much done it. All you can do is make a good decision about their next attempt and hope that they were in the right state when they got under the bar to do the best they can, right?
Yeah, 100%. There has to be context behind what you're saying. So you're saying that hips back being a novel cue. Like if you have a lifter that is, you know, that they sometimes go a little bit too fast, and that you've cued in training, slow down the descent, and you have a cue for that, whatever it may be, just slow or control. And there's context behind that, and you know that that helps them squatting in their execution, then yeah, throw that cue out there 100%. But just saying, I think it's just saying cues for the sake of saying cues is where it sort of falls apart. And we talk about something here, the concept of internal and external cueing. So internal cueing would be like squeeze your lats or squeeze your triceps or whatever it may be. External cueing is using your external environment to help with, so say in teaching an RDL, take your hips back to the back wall. You're giving them an external cue to work against. And we use a lot of external cueing because it's a lot easier for people to grasp the concept of moving and understanding their awareness in space. But I hear a lot of internal cues being thrown around at powerlifting comps of like squeeze your lats and squeeze your traps and whatever it may be. And it just doesn't mean anything. And so I hope that there's hopefully potentially people are listening to this that are coaching in some way, shape or form. And they start to think about, is what I am saying actually, is there purpose behind it? Is this going to get an outcome I want? Or is it just saying crap for the sake of saying crap?
Well, there is evidence on the role of internal and external cueing on performance. And external cueing almost always outperforms internal cueing. Internal cueing might have a place in submaximal hypertrophy training. I think there was a study on leg extensions that found that it was potentially beneficial. But that research is inconclusive because I think there's been more research showing that it made no difference. But external cueing does seem to help for strength performance and for performance generally. And maybe one reason is because it's less constraining. So you know how I said, like, if you direct your attention to something, it ultimately limits your options? That can be useful. So when you say, slow down your descent when you squat, right? Like if they have freedom to do everything else in their squat, provided they slow down their descent, and that's like the key performance thing that you want them to do, that's useful. Well, external cueing in the same way, if you say, take your hips to the wall behind you, or when you're deadlifting, whatever it is, keep the bar close to you.
One I can think of that would be really, it's like if you want someone to exert maximal force, it's just saying, push the floor away as hard as you can.
Yeah, perfect one, right? Yeah. So we say push the floor away as hard as you can when you're deadlifting. If you're approaching your absolute max when you deadlift and suddenly your hip extensors don't have enough strength in them to keep your hips back far from the bar, right? So your back starts to round a little bit and, you know, you're making some slight postural changes and you're maybe changing the recruitment patterns of your muscles, or at least like your lift doesn't resemble what it looks like at 70%, because the intent is still the same. The intent is push the floor away or keep the bar close or whatever. Your body, all it's doing is rearranging its motor pattern to most efficiently do that. It says, my hips can't do this on its own anymore or on their own. So I'm going to bring a little bit more back into it. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because my intention is push the floor away. Whereas if your cue is internal, so say you say like extend your back or whatever it is, right? Your attention is directed there. And so suddenly that's a constraint. And so you go to extend your back, you go to deadlift, your back can't extend can't stay extended. And what do? Do you fail at that cue by bringing your hips closer to the bar, or do you keep your hips back and go, well, with my back extended, I can't lift this thing, right? So with external cues, you actually give people more options and you say basically coordinate yourself to do this task. Whereas with internal cues, you're saying almost like do this task this way only. And so that can be useful, but it can be limiting on performance.
100%. It's this too much, just, it just doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
It doesn't, it's like it, in that context where you're a third attempt on a powerlifting competition, it just doesn't mean anything. And we see it time and time again when we do a little drill with our interns when they come in, that we try and get them to coach a plank or a dead bug, not using any words, and then only using like just words. And they can see very quickly that you don't actually have to use a lot of words. And just by showing someone, people respond very well to showing as well, that you can get the outcome you want without saying a lot. Like you don't need to talk for 2 minutes to show someone how to do a plank. And that has worked really, really well. One thing I wanted to switch, so we've talked obviously about that concept of over coaching or over cueing on, say, a platform or even in the gym, but even just over coaching when it comes to programming. This was something I used to get caught up in early on, was just making changes for the sake of making changes. And I know we discussed a little bit about it before. I think when the mics were off, but I used to get paranoid. I'm like, I was a new coach. I would get paranoid that if I wasn't making changes, people would think I was going to do nothing. I wasn't doing anything as a coach. But now I've realized the more experience I've gotten, the more knowledge I have, that as we've discussed as well, that not making changes is doing something.
That's literally exactly one of the notes that I wrote, is doing nothing is a decision. That's exactly doing something. So think about it in a medical context, right? Somebody comes into you and they've got coronavirus, just to be topical, right? And you've got like, as a doctor, you have the choice of giving them hydroxychloroquine or whatever that drug that doesn't work is, or saying like, go home and don't do anything, right? And in the case of coronavirus, I actually don't know what you're meant to do to treat people, but either way, electing not to give them the drug is a decision. You've said, okay, based on your clinical presentation and what I expect, doing this is going to yield as good as or a better outcome than doing that. Same thing's true in coaching. If you have somebody doing a block and it's been very successful, then electing to rerun that block as opposed to change it is you saying, well, like my best judgment is that doing this block is going to be as good as or better than making a change, or I don't see sufficient indication to make a change. And like, if in the case of, say, changing training or you know, using a novel drug or something, if there's no reason to think it will be better, then it can only be unhelpful, if that makes sense. Like, or like as in, or at least I should say, if you have no good reason to think it will be better, then it can only be unhelpful. Whereas if something is evidently helpful, then why wouldn't you persist with doing it? So yeah, I think doing nothing is way, way underrated. Like I've had clients doing very similar blocks sometimes for 3, 4, 5 months in a row recently, and eventually they do self-exhaust and it becomes quite obvious. But if it's still working, then it's still working, right?
Yeah, 100%. I found that I got caught up in my own biases because I like changes in my program. I like to keep it, and that's me. And I have realized that not all my clients they're not me. So some guys, if the block is working well, they're happy to just keep running the same thing over and over again. They don't get bored. They don't get bored of doing squat, bench, dead, squat, bench, dead, squat, bench, dead. But then I have other people that want constant change and variation. So obviously, as the coach, I have to figure out how to keep them progressing in the direction that we want with that change and variation. And so I guess it's just figuring out what people want and need. But I think I also got caught up personally early on making changes because I wasn't that confident in my knowledge or what I understood. So for me, that was a way of expressing, oh, I'm the coach. I made this change because that's what, but now I've realized, oh, no, I don't have to make that. And I can explain why for 5 minutes to a person, why that change doesn't need to be made. And we're going to keep running with that. And I think the more knowledge I've got and the more well-read I've become in strength training, I've realized that, yeah, changes don't need to be made.
Yeah, I think that sort of like, that insecurity in yourself as a coach is absolutely one of the reasons why it happened with me. And like, you know, I could probably have old clients listening to this now who'd be like, what's Will talking about? He's full of shit. Because like he's guilty of changing programs heaps and like explaining things in too much depth, because I certainly was. But it's something that I've become really conscious of for this reason. Is like, initially I thought, you know, my selling point as a coach is my knowledge. Like, you know, I got 5 or 6 years of tertiary education, like, you know, with fucking HD averages and shit. Like, people presume I'm smart. I write articles, they like them, I have a podcast. So I better make sure I demonstrate that continually, because if I don't demonstrate that to my clients, then what reason have they got to train with me as opposed to like the dude with a big chest and arms down the road? And so I was always like doing, and just trying to almost like prove myself. And then eventually, I came to realize that your coaching relationships are about much more than just you demonstrating your knowledge to your client. It's about creating, like you guys say, an experience, making them enjoy it, letting them learn for themselves. And you don't learn things just through semantic exchange of ideas in powerlifting coaching or in anything. So it's not about me telling my clients, it's about them learning for themselves and there being like a sounding board for their ideas. Letting them reflect and stuff, all those things. Once I started realizing that, I was much more comfortable in pulling back, and sometimes even like actually giving my clients the reins to make decisions, which initially was anathema to me. Like the idea that somebody would pay me to then have me say to them, well, what do you think is the best thing to do right now? It was like ridiculous. You know, I was meant to hold all the keys, whereas now I recognize that sometimes my clients have intuition that I don't. And sometimes I can say to them, what do you want to do, or what do you think is best? And at the very least, it gives me an insight into their motivation and what they're confident about and what they think they can do. And then maybe I can use my knowledge to like color those plans or like help them come to a more productive idea, or like reconcile differences in where we want to go. but it's not always about me just sort of, showing my intellect all the time because that doesn't actually help.
But I guess it's also like at the end of the day, you as the coach can facilitate the direction they want to go in. So like for hypertrophy work, it's like, all right, we need to get bigger triceps. We want to grow our triceps. We understand that the stimulus is tensioning the triceps with mechanical stimulus. Now, the variation or the movement we use can vary. So why not ask the client what they want to do, what they like doing, because then ultimately they're probably going to train it better and with more enthusiasm and get a better result anyway. So even though we're asking them, it's like they're still leveraging off our experience and understanding of training to get the best result. So, and I guess that also it just comes with more experience and more practice and more knowledge. And that's why the first tip we give anyone that comes here, wants to do the internship, what do I do? Just start coaching people. Find people that just coach them for free. Coach your brother, coach your mum, like do it for free. They're probably not going to listen to half the stuff you say, but that's a learning experience in itself because you're going to get clients like that. You're going to get clients that adhere to everything. So just through practice, you start to realize what the right decisions are to make at the right time. And no decision at all when it's just like, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And there's so many problems you can almost like get around by giving your clients a little bit more rope. Like you were saying, you like to impose change in programs and things because that's what you like. And I was very much the same. I was like, I had a rule when I wrote programs until like mid 2019 where if somebody had an accessory slot, so say they had bench pressing and they had secondary chest pressing on the same day, like every 4-week block, I was changing that exercise or else they'd get bored. And a couple of my clients eventually said to me, I'd love to do the same exercise for like 8 or 12 weeks. It feels really good for me when I progress at them. And like, I feel like I get to the 4-week mark and I'm just like progressing really happy. And then we change it again. And I was like, oh, well, there's no real reason I have to change that. So I started writing in like, pick a chest press or whatever, and just letting them pick it. And then the next block, I'd say, pick a chest press or change it. And half of my clients would say, like, I'm sick of doing push-ups now, I'll change it. And the other half would say, great, I'm going to keep training my dumbbell press or whatever it was because I'm getting better at it and I want to keep going that way. And I was like, great, that's a big load off my back. And it lets the client feel like they're in the driver's seat and like doing things that they want to do rather than things that they have to do. And like you said, ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like you just need a tool to, put some tension across the target muscles or whatever it happens to be. So like, why not give them the reins a little bit in that instance and like make everybody happy?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's definitely like some people like to just push an exercise for an extended period because they're enjoying getting better at it. They're enjoying like, they know I did that last week. I want to come and do a bit more. And then I had another point now. It's completely slipped my mind the whole time you were talking, but we'll come back to, it's gone. It's completely gone. I was like, I had a crazy point to make, but yeah, I think just pushing something that's just come back to me. I've realized though that most clients will tell me when they're bored of a movement. Like, so I don't even need to ask them. I sort of just facilitate, hey, make sure end of the block, really tell me the things you're enjoying and the things you're not. And just by saying that in an email, they'll typically tell me, hey, I am sick of doing walking lunges. Can we change it? Yep, done. And we put something else in. So you don't even have to, like most of the time, you're not going to have to really weed out something that someone doesn't like doing. They'll just tell you.
Well, it also, by having that, like, have your pick of these exercises slot in my programs, and then also having ones where, like, say leg day, if I said pick a hamstring isolation exercise, but then the unilateral exercise in the next slot was do a front foot elevated split squat. Like the fact that I've elected to say you're doing this exercise then means there's a reason that I want to do it. And that also like just gives a little bit more buy-in to doing that exercise to the client. And sometimes it'll prompt them to say, oh, why a front foot elevated split squat? And maybe I'll say, oh, because I want you to like control your hip in a position of deeper flexion or whatever it happens to be. But also just that contrast means that they know that when I prescribe things, they matter. And when I don't prescribe things, they don't matter, or I want them to express themselves. So it's like, it's a tool that cuts both ways.
Yeah, 100%. I think, it's definitely give or take, but like we've obviously talked a lot about athlete input and stuff, but there ultimately is you still have to stamp your foot down at times. And that's something I think I've swung a little bit. I swung very hard the athlete input way. And now I'm realizing, hang on, there's a few guys here. I've just got to tell them, no, this is what we're doing. This is the reason why. And we have to stick to it and make sure they agree upon it and then move and actually do that.
Yeah, I think I was talking to a mate about this podcast like 10 minutes before we started, because I have a client who I couldn't help but laugh when I got the email. He was basically saying, I think I'm overtraining. And, you know, he was citing all these problems that he was having. And I looked at his program and I'm like, man, the guy does 6 sets of legs a week. And he was complaining about overtraining. And like, they're like 6 sets of like RPE 6 to 8. I'm like, you're not overtraining. Like, there's something else at play here. And my mate was like, oh, you know, you better bring him up when you talk about like giving athletes choice, because if he had it his way, the guy would never train. And I was like, to a degree, like, that's true. You know, shout out to that athlete. But at the same time, like, the athlete's experience still exists, irrespective of whether we can sort of corroborate it with like what seems to be objective. So like in that instance, he's not overtraining, like, for sure, but his legs are still sore. Like, he's still not feeling good about his training. Like, I might say to him, hey man, we're going to persist with this level of volume, but like, let's make some tweaks. Like, let's have a compromise here. Because if I said basically, you're not overtraining and your legs aren't sore, he'd start questioning reality, because like his legs plainly are. So you've got even where you do have to impose yourself on athletes, it's still relevant that they have individual experiences that they want to share with you. And, you know, that like, I have a couple of powerlifters, say, who always want to lift heavy, but they always get beaten up when they lift heavy, and they don't seem to progress their best when they're lifting heavy. They actually progress their best when they're doing mostly quite sub-maximal. But I feel like if they're not exposed to really heavy lifts often enough, they can't see that they're progressing and stuff. And so like, part of coaching them is like walking the line and saying, well, how much am I going to give you to sort of feel that and feel happy about that? And how much am I going to give you of what I think you need? And how can I bring you around to my way of thinking? Or like, how can we satisfy each other here? Because again, you know, me just saying to them, well, I know you like that, but too bad, do what you don't like, is not going to be a good way to keep them as an athlete for a long time.
Yeah, 100%. It's again, that's all, that balance between getting them to do what they want and what they need, and just sort of fluctuating between the two. But that's ultimately what they are paying us for, and why they're not doing it themselves. So, and
there was something else related to, I'm looking at my notes. There's something else related to overcoaching that I think is like really important, which is like cueing and feedback and things in training.
Yep.
And like the feedback we give people on their technique. And this is another one where like I've made the biggest about faces, because, you know, when I was saying like clients hire me because I have knowledge, one of the best ways to demonstrate knowledge is to explain advanced biomechanics to clients. Right? But it's also one of the least productive ways to go about doing it. And when I wrote that article that I mentioned earlier, the Coaches Toolbox one that I spoke to Jason Clark about, when like, that was like the culmination of a whole lot of thinking on my part of like, why is it that I, who knows more about biomechanics and can explain technique in better detail to my clients more frequently and analyze their lifts more deeply, rep by rep with them after a set than the next coach, why is it that my athlete's technique doesn't get better at a way faster rate than the next guy? And so I started reading this literature, and we actually had a presentation at Lift by one of my colleagues about motor control and stuff. And I was listening to it and I was like, oh, you know, I heard all this stuff in uni. So I dug out my uni notes and I read them, and then I dug out some literature, and I was like, oh, I've been doing it all wrong. Or not like all wrong, but, you know, when we think of motor control, I said before that like, you don't like get given semantic knowledge and suddenly you're a good powerlifter. Like, if somebody's never done a squat before, you don't say to them, well, it's easy. You just find a tripod foot, like big diaphragmatic breath, set your upper back, break at the hips and knees together until you're below parallel. Make sure your knees don't fall out too far so you don't lose your big toe pressure. And then like dip into the hole and stand up really fast and try and bring your hips under to be as mechanically efficient as you can early. If you say that to someone, they still don't know how to squat, right? Like, they got no idea. The way they learn to squat is they start squatting. And they make mistakes. And remember before I said, like, you have this really well-developed motor control system where, like, you sense deviations from the plan and so it corrects it. So what happens is you start squatting, you make errors. So I put a bar on your back or a kettlebell in your hands and I say, I want you to squat down and stand up. And maybe I might say, try and keep your balance even across your feet. And you go to do it. And the first time you go, your knees go way too far forward and your heels come up and you're like, whoa, that feels bad. So then the next time you try letting your weight sit back on your heels a bit more and you go too far and you're almost falling over, you're like, oh, that feels bad. And slowly you start narrowing down your motor pattern until you're doing something good. But you can only do that with exposure. You actually need to go do some lifting, right? And just like I said, like, too much thinking actually interferes with that automaticity and it directs your attention to things that mightn't be helpful. Sometimes you actually just have to let people lift a little bit and let them self-discover what's a mistake, and as I was reading all this stuff, I was like, oh, this makes more and more sense. And this idea of like constraints-led motor behavior and constraints-led learning also just really jives with actually how we teach people to lift. So when somebody can't squat, often the first thing we do is like, maybe a wall squat if they're really bad, like, with a ball behind their back against a wall. But then you give them like a kettlebell to hold in front of them. They do a goblet squat, right? And doing that forces them to stay a bit more aligned through their rib cage and hips, and it lets them squat a little bit deeper. And then maybe you progress them to a low bar to a box, and that teaches them often to like actually let the hips displace back and so on. But we manipulate the movement itself because by giving them rules or constraints, their potential motor patterns are narrowed down, right? But you do that and you actually let people squat, and then your semantic knowledge, the things you say about, hey, like when you squat, you need to maintain your rib alignment or whatever. That's like backfill. It helps them reconcile their experiences, but you don't tell somebody how to squat to get them to squat. You get them to do their stuff. You talk to them about how did that feel. You give them some ideas for like options and you manipulate the exercises until slowly they get this better and better developed schema until suddenly they actually understand what they're doing and they can start to self-correct. And eventually once you've got like a mastery of a pattern and you can exhibit a squat that's actually really, really good, then the things that are limiting you are less motor learning inefficiencies and more like how strong or weak are you in the relevant muscles? Like, are your hips kicking back early now because your knee extensors aren't strong enough or because you don't know how to squat? And usually it's a large part because of the knee extensors and only a small part because you don't know how to squat, or that squat pattern has become adaptive for you because your knee extensors are weak. But either way, it's not about you telling people and cueing people and making them angsty about tiny errors in their lifting. It's about you actually getting them to lift and just letting them do it,
100%. It's the doing. The doing is the learning. And this is where learning guitar really helped me understand this stuff on a deeper level, because ultimately guitar is motor learning in, my left hand, trying to hold strings and chords. But one of the guys at the gym was teaching me early on, and I was caught up on my strumming. He's like, don't worry about your strumming. He's like, your strumming is going to get better. Like, just from doing it, just start practicing on your chord, start practicing your chord transitions and changing your fingers. And I have seen over the last 9-10 months that, my strumming, like there's still an intent to practice strumming, but just by practicing strumming, my rhythm's gotten better, emphasizing certain strums. Well, and it's the same concept with, squatting. Like, I used to think that I have to get this person in, and session one, I have to build them the best squat. But who's going to learn to squat in one session? No, it's going to take 3 months of doing it twice a week. And just by them doing reps and sets, I've realized the things that I can actually change that will help them quite a lot is maybe giving them more reps. So their brain is getting more repetitions, running that neural circuit more often, more exposure throughout the week. So maybe lower RPEs, lower relative intensities, but more exposure. So they're getting more repetitions again throughout the week. And that might be actually a better way of them learning how to squat rather than cueing them 400 million things in the first session and they end up leaving. And it also then stems back to analysis paralysis. Like, if you give them 5 million things to focus on, they're probably not going to focus on any of them.
No. There's a concept called augmented feedback as well.
Whoop.
Basically all that means, right? And so we can also pick.
Wait, you need to repeat. Right? You need to repeat that. The connection. unstable connection. Right? We're good. But repeat,
Okay.
augmented feedback. Start from there again.
Yeah, but okay. So there's a concept called augmented feedback, and it's essentially like you get a heightened sense of your success or failure at a task or an aspect of a task. And in a lifting sense, and again, I explained this in that article, I'm just going to try and direct people to it. No one will read it. It's like 8,000 words long. Jamie proofread it for me. He said it was good, but long.
It's called the Coaches Toolbox.
It's called the Coaches Toolbox. And then I think it says like cueing, prescription, and feedback or something.
And it's on your website.
On my website.
I'll put it in the description link of the podcast.
Unreal. If anybody actually gets through the whole thing, let me know. But augmented feedback. So you get like an exaggerated sense of your success or failure of the task, and you get feedback that you otherwise couldn't get just from past performance, right? So that could be a coach saying good or bad, which is great. But you can also just pick exercises that really exaggerate the feeling of success or failure. So if we do a safety bar squat and you're trying to coach somebody to not let their hips kick back, because the weight's distributed forward, this isn't technically augmented feedback because it's just a variation that exaggerates it. But if your hips kick back, you really, really feel it, right? And so, part of that thing that, like when I was saying we manipulate exercises to get people to lift correctly, the basis of us picking exercises should be first and foremost, like, does it actually put the person in the positions that we want them to be in? And secondly, does it make it obvious to them when they're not doing the things that we want them to do? Because they can really feel it, right? Because they're going to have a much greater sense of like their own feeling of doing an exercise than they are going to have like a sense of what it should be like on the basis of words we give them. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. It's just like altering loading implements is going to help people feel certain positions. So hence, front squat, goblet squat, we're probably going to get a little bit more sensation of anterior core and quads because we're staying a bit more upright. So now the anterior core is holding us upright, not our lower back. And something that Kyle Dobbs talks about is you can do this very simply. If you stand, because we're resisting gravity 24/7, if you stand upright and lean forward, what do you feel? It's like you feel your lower back latch on. And if you lean all the way back, you feel your hamstrings and anterior core switch on. So just by shifting your body's position in space and putting load to hold you in those positions, you're going to integrate different muscles. And you don't need to talk about that. You just give them the goblet squat. All of a sudden, they're going to start feeling a lot more anterior core and a lot more quads. So we chuck their heels up as well. So their knees go forward. They have to feel their quads. They have to feel anterior core. We don't have to cue that and tell them to feel them. And another thing that is very easy to do is just not tell people what to feel for. Let them do it and then ask them after, what did you feel? And pretty much straight away, I go, so it's a goblet squat, heels elevated. I felt my quads and my anterior core and my core. Awesome. We as coaches now know that they're doing it pretty much how we want to do it. Keep doing that.
I should correct myself because a much better example of augmented feedback might be like looking at a video of your set.
Yep. Yeah.
And that can actually be very helpful in a lot of ways as well, because it can help you reconcile like what you are feeling and what your performance looks like. And particularly if if you have sort of a model of what your good reps and bad reps look like as well, then you start sort of like being able to recognize and reconcile the deviances a bit better. So that would be a better example of augmented feedback, because obviously you don't have a visual appraisal of what your performance looks like unless somebody shows you a video. But what you said about, like Kyle Dobbs and just like, and can you get the correct sensation by doing an exercise? Absolutely correct. And I think doing that after the set is also smart too, because just like I said, if you see if you can feel your quads doing this, what's the first thing somebody's going to do? Is like they're going to try to feel their quads. That's going to change the way that they lift. And that may or may not be helpful. So you got to be judicious with saying, where are you going to put your attention during this set?
100%. Yeah. Leaving it a bit more open to them to sort of have their own experience. And then from their answer, you can sort of gauge if we're doing something correctly. If they're doing a heels elevated goblet squat and they're like, I can really feel my lower back. Well, maybe we've got to adjust. Then the next set we have to adjust something, and it might be getting them to exhale to get their ribs down a little bit more, or whatever it may be. But yeah, 100%. It's a very interesting, motor learning is a very interesting little rabbit hole, but we'll, I want to diverge because we've gone hard on motor learning over coaching. Before we wrap it up and talk about now, you're in a band, aren't you?
I am in a band.
So let's finish on the band, and we'll come back to where we started, which is extra hobby, extracurricular activity.
Yeah, man.
Tell us a little bit about your band.
Um,
How did it form? How long have you been together? What's the biggest gig you've played?
So this was kind of weird. What actually happened is one of my closest mates was started playing as a duo with the guy who's the singer in the band, and he was the lead guitarist. And they would play as a duo at this little cafe that was like about 5 minutes up the road from me because he lives right nearby as well. And they eventually moved from that cafe to a pub that was about 3 doors down. And they would play there on Sunday afternoons, and a lot of our mates would come up and watch them. And then another one of my friends is a pro muso. He's a pro saxophone player, but he's also like professional level drummer, very good guitarist. He started playing drums for them because they wanted to fill out their sound. And then he got one of his pro muso mates to play bass. And so they started playing like bigger gigs there. And I would always go and watch. And I've been a musician through my teenage years and things like my first jobs were teaching drums and guitar. And there was a while when I was like very, very good at both, but I also got very out of practice through my uni years because I just found myself busy and less interested. And so I was going to watch them, and for part of their set, the guy who was playing drums would play saxophone. So they'd play like Baker Street and Never Tear Us Apart by INXS and like Careless Whisper and stuff. And the band just sounded so hollow without drums. And I was always there having drinks. And I said, oh, like, if you guys are ever doing that, I could just play drums because like I know the songs, but also like drums are quite easy. And so it just became a bit of a thing that like whenever I was there and they went to do that, they'd like call me out of the crowd. And people who didn't know who I was or like know the band were always like, oh, it's so cool. Like they're, having crowd participation, but like it was completely planned. And so I would play with them for 3 or 4 songs. And then, I did that pretty regularly for like 6 or 8 months. This would have been like 2017 era. And somebody had a 60th birthday and hired the band. And I didn't know that. And I got a phone call from him at like, just on the weekend one day. And he goes, yeah, I've hired the band to play at my 60th birthday. And I really want you to come and play drums with them for those few songs. And like, I'll pay you the full fee as though you're in the band so long as you're just there for those songs. And I was like, well, fuck, all right. Like, and it was like, there were people that I knew who were going to the 60th. So I was like, it's not a bad time for me to just go hang out and have a few drinks and play some songs. So anyway, I do that. And about a week out from that, the guy rings me again and goes, oh, I heard you play guitar as well. Like, why don't you just bring your guitar and plug in and play with the boys? And I was like, okay. And like, I knew everyone in the band. So I spoke to them and they said, yeah, bring your guitar. So I brought my guitar and I plugged in, and where I knew songs, I actually played. And if I didn't, I literally turned my volume knob off on my guitar and just pretended to play with the band and did nothing whatsoever, right? And then I played drums for those few songs. And there was this one moment that was really funny where we were playing like Sultans of Swing or something, and I was playing guitar and not playing. I was turned off and just pretending to strum chords. No idea how it went. And the guy played like the solo from Sultan of Swings and like killed it. And I had this woman come up to me and go, that solo that you played was like the best guitar solo I've ever heard. And I just lost it laughing. I was like, oh my God, like that wasn't me. But anyway, so I'd been sort of hovering around the band, and finally I'd been hired for a gig. And that gig, that 60th birthday, actually happened about 3 or 4 days before my mate, the lead guitarist, went overseas. And he was moving to London, and he's still there now. And so he was going, and the boys were like, fuck, we want to keep this band going. But we've now lost our lead guitarist. And I was like, well, like I could play guitar for you if you wanted, but the guy who's playing drums for you now is a better guitarist than me. And I can play drums more easily than I can play guitar because it's just usually an easier instrument. Like you can just sort of like fluff along if you don't really know what you're doing. And so we just reshuffled the band, and I joined as the drummer. And so that was like 2018. since 2018, we've played pretty regularly. We probably play a gig every month or 6 weeks or something. Usually just pub gigs and things, but we've played a few weddings, and I've done a couple of duo gigs as well where I have played guitar, like at weddings and pubs and things. We've opened for a couple of bands, but it's all covers that we do. So like we opened for this Elton John covers band. That was one of the weirdest gigs we've played because it was on a golf course. And so we had like a marquee set up on the top of this hill at a fairway, and we were like playing down to people on picnic blankets and stuff. And then they had like this big stage set up off to the side of us. And so everybody was watching us. And then when we finished, they just turned their picnic blankets around and watched the main act start. But mostly it's just a pretty casual thing that I do. Like, we get some pocket money. Like if you play weddings, you get paid really well. We've played like some cool house parties and things like that too. But mostly it's just for fun and to like hang out with the boys. And if you do a gig and I make, $300-$500 or something for whatever it is, 4 to 6 hours of work, like it's cool. I'll throw that money in my wallet, but mostly it's for enjoyment and just the experiences and things, and like for an excuse to play music again,
Yeah, 100%. Oh, I'm interested because that's a goal. That's a goal of mine one day, to play some live music on the guitar. So that's why I'm sort of diving into music, a little bit of music theory at the moment. Learning about like the 12-bar blues and just understanding, because you do a lot of learning off YouTube, like playing songs and shit, but I want to actually understand what goes into a song, how is it written, staying in time, all that stuff, so that if there ever is an opportunity like to play, I actually understand what I'm doing and not just covering a song. Oh, it sounds cool, but I got no idea it's like speaking a bunch of words from a language and not knowing what they actually mean.
I'm reading a book right now. In fact, I finished it last night. It's called This Is Your Brain on Music. You should definitely read it. But this idea that like, because I don't consider myself an elite musician. I can play, I can learn songs, but like that's about as far as it goes. But this idea that like music is something that only like elite people do who are experts and other people have to like watch politely is so new, and it's so different. And like there are a lot of African cultures and things where there's no separate word for music and dancing, because when you sing, you dance, and everybody makes music together. And if you were to show up and, I've been to Africa and we went and had lunch with this group of people who did sing and dance and stuff for us. And if you were to say to them, like, I don't sing, they'd be like, what are you fucking talking about? Like everyone sings, you don't have to be good. And the same thing is true for music. I think one of the biggest barriers to entry is that people don't perceive themselves as being good enough to play. But then the opposite thing happens is if you just literally take it upon yourself to play music for people, they like assume that you're an expert and think you're really good. So you actually get a lot of leeway by doing it. And my dad ended up starting a music business. He previously worked in finance and he's now like semi-retired, but he started a music store. And one of the big things that prompted him to do it was because for his 50th birthday, he'd had a similar dream to you of like wanting to play live music, and he loved playing guitar. And so he got myself to play drums, my sister, who's a really good musician, to play keys, and a couple of his mates to play guitar and bass and sing with us. And we made like a 5 or 6 piece band. And he got all his friends into this venue, and he basically made them just listen to a concert of him dressed up as a rock god playing like Rolling Stones and Beatles songs that he loved. Everyone loved it, had the best time ever. And he was like, that was the most rewarding, enjoyable thing I've ever done in my life. And the idea that people learn instruments and then never actually put themselves out there to perform and play with other people is a tragedy. Because I can tell you, like playing drums, it's okay. Like I played some drums yesterday, just listening to music in my headphones. But playing with other people is like a completely separate experience. It's so communicative. It's so much fun. And when you do play to other people and you're able to like manipulate people's emotions or like give them an experience, like we talk about with training, giving them an experience that's moving and enjoyable, it makes you feel so good. And so he was like, there's got to be a place that takes people from A to Z. And so he starts this music store that does individual lessons, but also does band coaching. And so people of a similar standard get put into a band and they learn to play together, because playing in an ensemble is a separate set of skills. Like when I play drums with other people, I have to be looking around to look for visual cues of like, when are we changing sections? When are there stops? Like when are we building up and pulling back and so on? Things like that. so they do band coaching, and then they also get them gigs. So they have like a group of kids who are really, really good, who play professional gigs and have gone internationally and tour and stuff. But they also have like bands who are just like up and coming bands, or bands who are like pretty amateurish, that they get gigs at local pubs and stuff, where suddenly you can say to your friends like, hey, come along, have a drink. We're playing. You might get paid $200 as a band, but it doesn't matter. Suddenly you're actually playing live, and that's what music should be. And so, man, like, and to you, but anyone listening, like if you've got the remotest interest in playing music, find other people who'll play music with you and just start playing, and you'll get better so much quicker, but you'll enjoy music 10 times more than if you try and lock yourself up. It's like doing powerlifting and saying, I'm never going to compete until I can do a world record. It's dumb as fuck. Like, play some music, have a good time, and, maybe take it upon yourself to literally perform, even if it's just to a few people, but like play a little bit. And like, just like in powerlifting, if you have a bad meet, you don't think it's like the end of the world. If you make a mistake playing live, it's not the end of the world either. Just play and have fun. And like, that's what music should be. And it's the best thing ever if you do it. That's what I think.
Yeah, 100%. I like that little spiel, man. That was really good. I feel like it was a great way to wrap up this conversation, because we've been going for 90 minutes now. We'll probably keep going, but yeah, man, that was a great way to wrap it up. Just quickly, that book that you recommended,
I'll get it.
And then we'll,
it's called,
because I will personally like to read or listen to that if it's on Audible.
Yeah, it's called this. It's called This Is Your Brain on Music, and the author is Daniel Levitin. And it's actually, it speaks a little bit about like the cultural and evolutionary basis of music, but it also talks about like, about the brain and music. So like neuroscience, cognition, which structures in the brain are involved in music processing, and like what makes it unique. And it's really, really interesting. Like if you're at all interested in music, you should just read it, because, you'll learn some stuff. It's cool. It's a good book.
Well, music in itself, I think I'll just wrap up with this, but music, it's just like, there's something about music that is like, it's been around for so long. You're never out socializing without either background music or at a bar or at someone's house. There's always music. Music is there. We connect with it on so many levels, and whether we even consciously know it or not, but it's always in our lives. It's always there. We go to big festivals, we go to concerts, because like music, like it's a very, very big part of our life. So to be learning a little bit about that now, and how it has like the music theory behind it, has been a really, really cool experience. So I'll definitely give that book a read for sure. Or look it up.
There's a lot analogous. I won't launch this into a whole conversation, but there's a lot analogous between like music and music theory and stuff, and training, and the way we think about training too. And it's just such a rewarding thing to dive into. Like
I'm going to put that down as a future podcast topic.
Okay, sure.
And we'll have another 90-minute conversation on that. But we'll wrap up today, because we usually try and keep them at an hour, but we've gone way over today. Yeah, we'll wrap up today. If anyone is looking to get in contact with you, where can they find you?
So on Instagram, I'm at w.berkmanpt, and I'm pretty much always on Instagram. So if you message me there, I'll answer. But for coaching inquiries, you can either go on my website, which is willberkman.com. That's where you can find any articles I've written. And under services, you can inquire there, or you can just email me directly, which is will@willberkman.com. So basically contact me any of those ways. I'm pretty diligent in getting back to you, and I'd be thrilled to have anybody who wants to train on.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks for your time today, man.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.